The snow fell thick outside the crumbling apartment on Chicago's South Side, where Maria clutched her swollen belly and stared at the empty refrigerator. 8 months pregnant, 3 days without a real meal, and her landlord's eviction notice crumpled on the kitchen counter. She'd pawned everything of value weeks ago, everything except the antique locket her mother gave her before dying when Maria was 16. When the knock came at 11:47 p.m. on Christmas Eve, Maria almost didn't answer. But desperation has a way of making decisions for you. The elderly man standing in her doorway wore an expensive coat and carried bags of groceries, his eyes immediately focusing on the locket around her neck. "Miss Rodriguez," he said softly, "I've been looking for you for 20 years. He claimed to represent her grandfather, the grandfather she'd been told was dead. The grandfather whose family had disowned her teenage mother for refusing an arranged marriage. Now he was dying, worth millions, and wanted to make amends. But there was a catch that would test everything Maria believed about family, forgiveness, and second chances. What would you do if the family that abandoned you suddenly wanted you back? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Maria's hand instinctively went to the locket at her throat, the metal warm against her cold skin. The stranger's weathered face held kindness, but she'd learned not to trust kindness from men who appeared without warning. "You're mistaken," she said, though her voice wavered. "My grandfather is dead. My mother told me—" "Your mother told you what she needed you to believe." The man shifted the grocery bags, and Maria caught the scent of fresh bread, real food that made her stomach clench with hunger. "May I come in? The snow is getting worse, and we have much to discuss." Maria hesitated, her bare feet growing numb against the drafty floor. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. She glanced at the eviction notice, then at the stranger's expensive shoes, now dusted with snow. "Who are you?" "Thomas Whitman. I've been your grandfather's attorney for 43 years. He reached into his coat and produced a business card, the letterhead embossed with gold. "And I've been searching for you since your mother disappeared." The word "disappeared" hit Maria like a physical blow. Her mother hadn't disappeared. She'd died in a car accident when Maria was 16, leaving her to navigate the foster system alone until aging out at 18. "That's impossible. My mother died in—" "She died in a hospital in Denver, 3 states away from where she'd been living." Thomas's voice was gentle but firm. "She'd been hiding, Maria, from your grandfather, from the family, from a life she'd rejected. But before she died, she asked the hospital to contact our firm. She wanted to make sure you were protected, that you'd have choices she never had." Maria's legs felt weak. She stepped back, allowing Thomas to enter the tiny apartment. He set the grocery bags on her rickety kitchen table and surveyed the sparse room without judgment. "Your grandfather, Eduardo Rodriguez, owns Rodriguez Holdings, hotels, restaurants, real estate across 3 countries. When your mother, Isabella, refused to marry the man he'd chosen for her, he disowned her in anger. It's a decision that's haunted him for 25 years. If he's so haunted, where has he been?" Maria's voice cracked with years of buried pain. "I've been alone since I was 16. I've worked 3 jobs while going to school, lived in my car, eaten at food banks." "Where was his guilt then?" Thomas reached into his coat again, this time producing a thick envelope. "He hired investigators, but Isabella was careful. She changed her name twice, paid only in cash, never stayed anywhere long enough to be found. By the time we located her, she was already in the hospital, and you'd vanished into the foster system under a different name." Maria stared at the envelope, her heart pounding. The baby shifted restlessly inside her, pressing against her bladder. "He's dying, Maria. Pancreatic cancer. The doctors say weeks, maybe a month." Thomas set the envelope on the table beside the groceries. "He wants to meet you, to apologize, and to ensure his grandchild." His eyes moved to her swollen belly. "Never wants for anything. His grandchild? You're carrying the next generation of Rodriguez blood. Eduardo's only heir, since your mother was his only child. Thomas paused. There are conditions, of course. There always are with families like ours. But the choice is yours to make. Maria sank into the apartment's single chair, overwhelmed. 24 years old, alone, broke, and now being offered a fortune by a grandfather who'd let her mother live in poverty rather than accept her choices. What kind of conditions? Thomas smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. That, my dear, is a conversation for tomorrow. Tonight, there's food to eat and decisions to consider. But Maria, he moved toward the door, your grandfather isn't the only one who's been looking for you. The stranger stepped into her apartment without invitation, his expensive shoes clicking against the worn linoleum. Sarah instinctively wrapped her arms around her swollen belly, backing toward the kitchen counter. The scent of his cologne, something rich and woody, filled the cramped space, making her acutely aware of how her home must smell to him. Day-old takeout containers, the mustiness of old carpet, the faint odor of desperation. Please don't be afraid, he said, setting the grocery bags on her small dining table with careful precision. My name is Marcus Whitmore. I work for your family. Sarah's breath caught. I don't have a family. The Ashford family would disagree. His dark eyes studied her face with an intensity that made her skin crawl. You have your grandmother's bone structure. Eleanor always said you would. The name hit her like a physical blow. Eleanor Ashford, her father's mother, who had cut all ties when Sarah was 7 years old. The woman who had looked at her with such cold disgust at her father's funeral, as if Sarah herself was somehow responsible for the car accident that had claimed both her parents. Grandmother Eleanor is dead, Sarah said flatly. Has been for 3 years. Yes. Marcus reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope, cream-colored and heavy. Which is why I'm here. She left specific instructions regarding you. Sarah stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. She made it very clear she wanted nothing to do with me. Called my mother a gold digger and said I was... She stopped, the old wound still too raw to voice aloud. Said you were what? Marcus's voice had gone soft, almost gentle. A mistake. The word tasted bitter. A bastard child who would never belong in their world. Something flickered across Marcus's features. Surprise, perhaps, or anger. Mrs. Ashford was complicated, proud, sometimes too proud for her own good. He extended the envelope toward her. But she was also thorough. This contains details about a trust fund established in your name 25 years ago. It's been accumulating interest. Sarah didn't move to take it. Why now? Why after all these years? Because the terms of the trust required that you be contacted only if you were truly in need. His gaze dropped to her belly, then swept across her shabby apartment. And according to my research, you are very much in need. The clinical way he said it made her cheeks burn with shame. Your research? I know about the medical bills, the job you lost last month when your supervisor discovered your pregnancy. I know about the eviction notice. He paused. I also know about the baby's father. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Derek has nothing to do with this. On the contrary, his abandonment is precisely what triggered the trust's activation clause. Eleanor was very specific about the circumstances that would warrant intervention. She knew? Sarah's voice came out as barely a whisper. How could she know about Derek when she never even... She had people watching you. From a distance, always from a distance. Marcus set the envelope on the counter between them. She wanted to help Sarah, but her pride, her fear of appearing weak to the other family members, it complicated things. So, she waited until I was desperate enough to come crawling back? She waited until you needed family more than you needed independence. The distinction in his voice was subtle but important. There's a difference. Sarah stared at the envelope, her heart hammering against her ribs. The baby kicked, a strong jab to her lower ribs that made her wince. As if even her unborn child was reminding her that pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. What's the catch? She asked finally. The catch? Rich families don't just hand out money without strings. What do they want in return? My firstborn? My soul? She laughed, but there was no humor in it. What's left of it, anyway? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, studying her with those unsettling dark eyes. The family would like to meet you, formally, at the annual Christmas gathering tomorrow evening. Absolutely not. The response was automatic, visceral. The trust cannot be fully activated without family recognition. It's an old clause, dating back to Eleanor's father. Very traditional, very Ashford. He straightened his expensive tie. Without that recognition, you'll receive only a modest monthly stipend. Enough to cover basic needs, perhaps, but nothing more. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the walls of her carefully constructed independence crumbling around her. 25 years of silence, and now they wanted her to dance for their approval like a trained monkey. How much? She asked, hating herself for asking. Monthly? 3,000. Her eyes snapped open. And with family recognition? Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Considerably more. Outside, snow began to fall again, and Sarah wondered if she was about to make a deal with the devil himself. The warmth from the fire David had built spread through the apartment like a gentle embrace, but Sophia couldn't shake the chill that had settled in her bones the moment he'd spoken her grandmother's name. She watched him move around her small kitchen with practiced efficiency, unpacking containers that smelled of rosemary and sage, of Christmas dinners she'd only imagined. "You haven't answered my question," she said, one hand protectively covering her belly. "How do you know about my grandmother?" David paused, a container of what looked like glazed ham halfway to the counter. "Because I work for your family, Sophia. I have for the past 15 years. The words hit her like a physical blow. Family. The word felt foreign on her tongue, a concept she'd buried so deep she'd almost convinced herself it didn't matter anymore. Almost. "I don't have family," she said quietly. "My grandmother made that very clear when she threw me out. Your grandmother is dead." The container slipped from David's hands, clattering against the counter. He turned to face her, and she saw something she hadn't noticed before, a carefully controlled grief in his dark eyes. "She died 3 months ago," he continued, his voice gentle but steady. "Pancreatic cancer. It was quick." Sophia felt the room tilt slightly. She gripped the arm of her chair, trying to process this information. Eleanor Blackwood was dead. The woman who had raised her with iron discipline and colder affection, who had cut her from the family tree like a diseased branch, gone. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. David resumed his careful arrangement of food, but his movements were less sure now, because she left instructions. Very specific instructions about you. She disowned me. The words came out harsher than Sophia intended. I was 18, pregnant, and she told me I was a disgrace to the family name. She said if I kept the baby, I would never be welcome in her house again. You kept the baby. It wasn't a question. Sophia's free hand instinctively moved to join the other over her current pregnancy. For 6 months, until the accident. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken grief. David stopped pretending to organize the food and turned to face her fully. "She knew," he said simply, "about the accident, about the baby you lost, about everything." Sophia's world shifted again, this time more violently. "That's impossible. I never contacted her. I never—" "She had people watching you, discreetly. She knew about your marriage to James, knew when he started drinking, knew when he lost his job. She knew about the car accident that took him and your daughter." The fire crackled in the silence that followed. Sophia felt tears she thought she'd exhausted years ago burning behind her eyes. She knew, and she did nothing? She was proud, Sophia, stubborn as they come. But in the end... David reached into his coat pocket and withdrew an envelope, thick and cream-colored, with her name written in her grandmother's familiar, spidery handwriting. In the end, she regretted everything. Sophia stared at the envelope as if it might burst into flames. "I don't want it. Your grandmother left you everything, Sophia. The house, the investments, the trust funds. Everything. The words should have meant something. Relief, vindication, security for her unborn child. Instead, they felt like stones in her stomach. It's too late. Is it? David's voice held a challenge now. You're living in poverty, alone, pregnant, with no way to support yourself or your child. Your grandmother's estate is worth $12 million. $12 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. Sophia had been counting quarters for groceries just hours ago. Why you? She asked suddenly. Why are you the one bringing me this news? Who are you to my family? For the first time since he'd arrived, David looked uncomfortable. He ran a hand through his graying hair and moved closer to the fire. I was your grandmother's companion, I suppose you could say, her confidant. I managed her affairs, kept her company in those last years when the rest of the family had scattered or disappointed her in various ways. You were more than that, Sophia said, reading the careful way he held himself, the grief he was trying so hard to contain. David met her eyes then, and she saw the truth he wasn't quite ready to speak. Your grandmother was a complicated woman, Sophia. Difficult to love, but you did love her. I did. The admission hung between them like a bridge. Sophia wasn't sure she was ready to cross. This man had loved the woman who had broken her heart, who had cast her out when she needed family most. Yet here he was on Christmas Eve, trying to give her everything she'd lost. The baby kicked then, sharp and insistent, as if reminding her that this wasn't just about her anymore. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed 9 times, its deep resonance filling the silence that had settled between them. Elena watched Marcus carefully arrange the remaining food containers on her small kitchen counter, his movements precise and deliberate. Everything about him seemed calculated, from his perfectly pressed coat to the way he measured his words. You mentioned my father, she said finally, her hands wrapped around the warm mug of tea he'd prepared. Jonathan Ashworth died when I was 12. Car accident. Marcus paused, a container of what appeared to be homemade soup halfway to the refrigerator. That's what they told you. The simple statement hit her like a physical blow. What do you mean, what they told me? He closed the refrigerator door and turned to face her, his expression grave. Your father didn't die in a car accident, Miss Ashworth. He was very much alive 3 months ago when I last saw him. Elena's mug slipped from her numb fingers, ceramic shattering against the linoleum floor. Tea spread in a dark puddle around her feet, but she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The baby kicked sharply, as if responding to her sudden distress. That's impossible, she whispered. My mother. She showed me the death certificate, the obituary. We went to his funeral. Marcus's eyes softened with something that might have been pity. He retrieved a dish towel from the counter and knelt to clean up the spilled tea, giving her a moment to process his words. When he straightened, his expression was carefully neutral. Your mother was protecting you from a very painful truth. Your father made choices, difficult choices that led to his estrangement from the family. When you were 12, there was an incident, a business decision that went catastrophically wrong. People were hurt, financially ruined. The family name was nearly destroyed. Elena gripped the back of her chair, her knuckles white. You're lying. I wish I were. He folded the towel with the same methodical precision he'd shown with everything else. Your grandfather, Theodore Ashworth, gave your father an ultimatum. Face the consequences and potential criminal charges, or disappear completely. Leave the country, assume a new identity, and never contact his family again. The room seemed to tilt around her. Elena sank into the chair, her hand automatically moving to her belly. And my mother? She chose to go with him, but they couldn't take you. It would have raised too many questions. So they staged the accident, complete with closed casket services and forged documents. You were left in the care of your Aunt Sarah, who believed the story as completely as you did. Sarah, the woman who had reluctantly taken Elena in, who had made it clear every day that she was a burden, who had thrown her out the moment she turned 18 with barely enough money for a bus ticket and the clothes on her back. Where is he now? The words came out as barely a whisper. Marcus hesitated. Your father died 2 years ago. Liver failure, from what I understand. Your mother passed the following winter. But before your father died, he reached out. He'd been trying to find you for years, Elena. He wanted to make things right. Elena felt tears streaming down her face, though she couldn't remember when they'd started. 15 years. 15 years of believing she was an orphan, of struggling alone, of wondering why she'd been abandoned by everyone who was supposed to love her. Why didn't he find me sooner? The family made sure you were difficult to locate. New social security number, sealed records. They wanted to ensure no scandal could touch the Ashworth name through you. Marcus's jaw tightened. Your grandfather was a thorough man when it came to protecting his legacy, but he's dead now. 6 months ago. Which is why I'm here. Marcus pulled an envelope from his coat pocket, thick and cream-colored with an official-looking seal. Your father left specific instructions. If anything happened to him, I was to find you and deliver this. It took me nearly 2 years to track you down. Elena stared at the envelope, as if it might burst into flames. What is it? A trust fund that your father established before his supposed death. He managed to hide assets, small amounts over the years, building something for you. It's not the full Ashworth fortune, but it's substantial enough to change your circumstances. He set the envelope on the table between them, enough to give your child the kind of life you never had. The baby moved again, a gentle rolling motion that reminded Elena she wasn't just making decisions for herself anymore. She looked around her tiny apartment, the peeling wallpaper, the second-hand furniture, the stack of overdue bills on the counter. What's the catch? She asked, because there was always a catch. Marcus smiled for the first time since he'd arrived, though it didn't reach his eyes. The catch, Miss Ashworth, is that accepting this inheritance means the family will know exactly where you are, and despite your grandfather's death, not everyone wants to welcome the prodigal daughter home. The morning light filtered through Sarah's thin curtains, casting pale shadows across the empty food containers scattered on her coffee table. She'd eaten more in one evening than she had in the past 3 days combined, and for the first time in weeks, the gnawing hunger had subsided. But with the physical relief came an avalanche of questions that had kept her awake most of the night. She pulled Marcus's business card from her pocket, running her thumb over the embossed letters. The address listed was in the heart of downtown's financial district, the kind of place where decisions involving millions were made over lunch. How had someone like him known to find her in this cramped apartment that even her landlord seemed to forget existed? The baby kicked, a gentle reminder that whatever choices she made now would affect more than just herself. Sarah placed her hand on her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement beneath her palm. A knock at the door made her freeze. It was barely 8 in the morning, and Mrs. Chen from downstairs was the only person who ever visited, usually to complain about noise that Sarah was certain she'd never made. Through the peephole she saw Marcus standing in the hallway, looking impossibly put together despite the early hour. He wore a different coat today, charcoal grey instead of navy, but the same air of quiet confidence surrounded him like expensive cologne. Sarah opened the door, acutely aware of her rumpled pajamas and unwashed hair. "You're early." "I brought coffee," he said, holding up a paper bag. "Decaf for you and pastries from that bakery on 5th Street, the one that's been there since 1952. The specificity of his knowledge about the neighborhood struck her as odd. She stepped aside to let him in, noting how he seemed to navigate her small space as if he'd been there before, careful not to bump into the corner of her bookshelf that jutted out at an awkward angle. "You said you'd explain everything," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from him. "I need to understand how you know about my family, how you know about me." Marcus nodded, pulling a manila folder from his briefcase. "Your grandmother, Catherine Blackwood, hired our firm 15 years ago, not for legal services, but for something more personal. She wanted us to find you." Sarah's breath caught. "Find me? But they were the ones who—" She stopped, the words catching in her throat like thorns. "Who cut you off when your mother died?" "Yes, I know." Marcus's expression softened. Catherine regretted that decision every day for the rest of her life. She was devastated when she learned what had happened, how you'd been left with nothing. The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. If she regretted it so much, why didn't she contact me herself? Marcus opened the folder, revealing photographs that made Sarah's heart lurch. There was her grandmother, older than Sarah remembered, but unmistakably the same woman who had once braided her hair and taught her to play piano. The photos showed Catherine in what appeared to be a hospital bed, connected to various machines. She was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer 3 months after she hired us, Marcus explained gently. The prognosis was not optimistic. She wanted to reach out to you, but she was terrified you'd refuse to see her. She thought it would be cruel to burden you with her illness when you'd already suffered so much loss. Sarah stared at the photographs, memories flooding back unbidden. Catherine teaching her to make Christmas cookies, reading stories by the fireplace, defending Sarah when her father had been particularly harsh about some perceived failure. After her mother's death, when the family had closed ranks and turned their backs on the pregnant teenager who reminded them too much of scandal and shame, Sarah had convinced herself that her grandmother had agreed with their decision. So instead she left instructions, Marcus continued, very specific instructions about how to find you when the time was right and how to help without making you feel like charity. She knew you'd inherited her pride along with her eyes. Her eyes? Sarah touched her cheek unconsciously. Marcus smiled. Green as sea glass, she used to say. She had dozens of photos of you as a child, kept them in an album labeled My Heart. The tears came without warning, hot and overwhelming. Sarah had spent so many years building walls around the pain of her family's abandonment that she'd forgotten how much she'd loved her grandmother, how safe she'd felt in Catherine's presence. The trust fund she established for you has been growing for 15 years, Marcus said quietly. But there's a condition. She wanted you to understand the full truth about why your family treated you the way they did before you decide whether to accept the inheritance. Some truths, Sarah, are more complicated than they appear. Sarah wiped her eyes, steeling herself. What kind of truth? Marcus's expression grew grave. The kind that might change everything you thought you knew about your mother's death. The morning light filtered through Sarah's thin curtains, casting pale shadows across the empty takeout containers scattered on her coffee table. She'd managed to sleep fightfully after Marcus left, her dreams filled with fragments of conversations she'd never heard and faces she couldn't quite remember. Now, sitting up slowly to accommodate her growing belly, the events of the previous evening felt surreal. The business card lay where she'd left it on the side table, its embossed lettering catching the weak December sunlight. Marcus Chen, estate attorney. Below it, his personal note was written in precise handwriting, "Call when you're ready to hear the whole truth." Sarah picked up the card, running her thumb over the raised text. The paper was expensive, substantial, the kind of thing her grandmother would have approved of. Margaret Whitmore had always been particular about quality, about maintaining appearances. Even in Sarah's fragmented childhood memories, her grandmother's standards had been impossibly high. The baby kicked, a sharp jab against her ribs that made her wince. "I know," she murmured, placing her hand on her stomach. "We need answers, don't we?" She reached for her phone and dialed before she could change her mind. Marcus answered on the second ring, his voice warm but professional. "Sarah, I was hoping you'd call. I've been thinking about what you said last night, about my grandmother, about the money." She paused, steeling herself. "I want to know what really happened, why my mother and I were cut off. Are you free this morning? There's something I'd like to show you." An hour later, Sarah stood outside the Whitmore building downtown, craning her neck to take in its Art Deco facade. She'd walked past it countless times over the years, never knowing it bore her family's name. The brass nameplate beside the entrance gleamed, despite the overcast sky. Whitmore Holdings, EST, 1952. Marcus appeared at the revolving door, dressed in a charcoal suit that made him look older, more formal than he had in her apartment. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding her through the elegant lobby with its marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The elevator carried them to the 15th floor, where Marcus led her down a hallway lined with portraits of distinguished-looking people. Sarah found herself searching the faces for familiar features, for some echo of her own appearance. "Here," Marcus said, stopping before a portrait of a severe-looking woman with Sarah's same dark hair and determined jawline. The brass plaque read, "Margaret Whitmore, 1925 to 2018 Chairman Emeritus." "She looks like you," Marcus observed quietly, "especially around the eyes." Sarah studied her grandmother's painted face, looking for warmth and finding none. "She looks formidable." She was. "Your grandmother built this company from a small real estate firm into one of the largest property development companies on the East Coast. She was brilliant, ruthless when necessary, and absolutely devoted to the Whitmore legacy." They continued down the hall, past more portraits, until Marcus opened a door marked Conference Room A. Inside, a mahogany table stretched the length of the room, surrounded by leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. "This is where the board meetings were held," Marcus explained, pulling out a chair for Sarah. "Your grandmother presided here for over 40 years. Sarah sat down carefully, her hands resting on her belly. "What does this have to do with my mother? With why we were abandoned?" Marcus took the seat beside her, opening a leather portfolio he'd carried up from the lobby. "Your mother was Margaret's only child, brilliant like her mother, but also rebellious. She was expected to take over the company eventually, to carry on the Whitmore name and tradition. But she didn't. She fell in love." Marcus pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. "With your father." Sarah's breath caught. The photograph showed a young woman who looked remarkably like Sarah herself, laughing as a handsome man with kind eyes spun her around in what appeared to be a park. They looked deliriously happy, carefree in a way Sarah had never seen her mother. "She was beautiful," Sarah whispered, touching the edge of the photograph. "Your father was a teacher," Marcus continued. "High school English. He came from a working-class family, had no money, no social connections. In Margaret's eyes, he was completely unsuitable, so she cut them off. She gave your mother an ultimatum: give up your father and inherit everything, or marry him and lose the family forever." Marcus's voice was gentle but matter-of-fact. "Your mother chose love." Sarah stared at the photograph, seeing her parents' youth and hope frozen in time, and my grandmother never forgave her. Margaret Whitmore didn't believe in forgiveness. She believed in consequences. When your mother left, Margaret removed her from the will, had her name struck from all family documents. As far as she was concerned, Elizabeth Whitmore ceased to exist. The baby shifted restlessly, as if sensing Sarah's emotional turmoil. She thought about her mother's struggles, the years of working multiple jobs, the pride that prevented her from ever speaking about her family's wealth. "But I exist," Sarah said finally. "I'm here." The morning light filtered through the frosted windows, casting long shadows across Elena's small apartment. She sat at her kitchen table, staring at the business card Marcus had left behind. Blackwood, Stern and Associates. The raised lettering seemed to mock her with its elegance. Her fingers traced the embossed edges as she replayed their conversation from the night before. A knock at the door made her jump. Through the peephole she saw Marcus again, this time holding a leather briefcase and wearing a more formal charcoal coat. His expression was serious, almost grave. "I brought the documents," he said when she opened the door. "If you're ready." Elena hesitated. Part of her wanted to slam the door and pretend none of this was happening, but the baby kicked, reminding her of the reality she couldn't escape. She stepped aside to let him in. Marcus set his briefcase on the coffee table and opened it with precise clicks. Inside, manila folders were arranged with meticulous care. He pulled out the first one and handed it to her. "This is your grandfather's will," he said softly. The original, dated 15 years ago. Elena's hands trembled as she opened the folder. The legal language swam before her eyes, but certain phrases jumped out. My beloved granddaughter, Elena Catherine Winters, and sole heir to the Hartwell estate. I don't understand, she whispered. If this is real, why am I living like this? Why did they let me struggle? Marcus pulled out a second folder, this one thicker. Because your Aunt Victoria had this. He showed her another document, dated just 6 months after her grandfather's death. A codicil to the will, allegedly signed by your grandfather before he died, leaving everything to her instead. Elena looked between the two documents. Allegedly? The handwriting analysis came back last week. The codicil is a forgery. Marcus's voice carried a weight of controlled anger. Your aunt has been living off your inheritance for over a decade. The room spun around Elena. She gripped the edge of the table, trying to process what he was telling her. But why now? Why are you here now? Marcus sat down across from her, his professional demeanor softening. Because Victoria is dying. Pancreatic cancer. She has maybe 3 months left, and her conscience is finally getting to her. He paused, studying Elena's face. She hired my firm to find you and make things right. Make things right? Elena's voice rose. She stole my inheritance. She let me drop out of college because I couldn't afford tuition. She let me work 3 jobs just to survive. And now she wants to make things right? Elena. No. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the floor. Do you know what I've been through? Do you know how many nights I've gone to bed hungry? How many times I've had to choose between rent and groceries? Marcus remained seated, his eyes never leaving her face. I know you've been working at Morrison's diner for 2 years. I know you live paycheck to paycheck. I know you're 7 months pregnant and the baby's father left when he found out. His voice was gentle but firm. I know because I've been watching you for weeks, trying to figure out how to approach this situation. Elena felt violated and exposed. You've been watching me? I had to understand who you are before I disrupted your life with this information. Marcus stood slowly. Your aunt may have wronged you, but she's not entirely heartless. She wanted to make sure you were worthy of the Hartwell name. Worthy. The word came out like a slap. I told her you were more than worthy. You're stronger than she ever was. Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. The estate is worth $47 million, Elena. Properties in 3 states, investment portfolios, trust funds. It's all yours. It was always yours. Elena sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. $47 million. The number was so large it felt abstract, meaningless. What does she want from me? She wants to meet you, to explain what happened, why she did what she did. Marcus pulled out a final document. And she wants to transfer everything back to you before she dies. Legally, cleanly, no questions asked. Elena stared at the paper without really seeing it. And if I refuse? If I tell her to go to hell? Then you continue living as you are now. The money eventually goes to charity, as specified in the forged codicil. Victoria dies with her secret, and you, he gestured around the small, cramped apartment, you raise your child here. The baby kicked again, stronger this time. Elena placed her hand on her belly, feeling the little life inside her that depended entirely on her decisions. She thought about the past 10 years of struggle, the humiliation, the fear. Then she thought about the future she could give her child with that kind of money. When does she want to meet? The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have, weighted with secrets that had been buried for 15 years. Elena sat at her kitchen table, the overhead light casting harsh shadows across the documents spread before her. Gabriel remained standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the snow-laden glass. Your father didn't abandon you, he said quietly. He fought for you until the day he died. Elena's hands trembled as she lifted the first document, a custody petition dated 3 months before the car accident. Her father's signature sprawled across the bottom, bold and determined. The words blurred as tears gathered in her eyes. I don't understand. My grandmother said he wanted nothing to do with me after the divorce. Gabriel turned from the window, his expression grim. Victoria Hartwell has many talents. Truth-telling isn't one of them. He moved closer, pointing to a highlighted section in the legal papers. Your father was seeking full custody. He'd discovered something about your mother's death, something that made him question the official story. The baby stirred within her, and Elena pressed a hand to her stomach. What kind of something? The brake lines on your mother's car had been tampered with. The words hit her like a physical blow. Elena gripped the edge of the table, the room spinning slightly. That's impossible. It was an accident. Everyone said what Victoria wanted them to say. Gabriel's voice carried a bitter edge. Your grandmother has considerable influence in this town. The police investigation was thorough enough to satisfy the insurance companies, but not thorough enough to ask uncomfortable questions. Elena stared at the documents, her mind reeling. You're saying my grandmother murdered my mother? I'm saying your father believed someone did. And 3 days before his custody hearing, before he could present his evidence to a judge, his car went off Millbrook Bridge. Gabriel sat down across from her, his dark eyes intense. 2 accidents, Elena. 2 people who stood between Victoria and complete control of you, and through you, control of your inheritance. The kitchen felt too small, the air too thick. Elena pushed back from the table, pacing to the sink. Outside, the snow continued to fall, each flake catching the light like tiny ghosts. Why didn't anyone tell me? Why didn't anyone investigate further? Who was left to tell you? Your father was dead. The private investigator he'd hired disappeared, took a sudden job in California, and was never heard from again. You were 8 years old and traumatized. Victoria stepped in as the grieving grandmother, ready to provide stability and care. Gabriel's voice turned cold. She played the role perfectly. Elena's reflection stared back at her from the dark window, hollow-eyed, exhausted, carrying new life while learning about old deaths. The trust fund. That's why she kept me close, isn't it? Why she controlled everything. The inheritance was structured to pass to you at 25, but only if you maintained family ties. If you were deemed unworthy, or if you died without heirs, everything would revert to Victoria. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. That's why she was so angry when I left, why she cut me off completely. Elena's hand moved protectively over her belly. And now there's going to be another heir. Gabriel nodded grimly. Which changes everything. Your child represents millions of dollars that Victoria thought would eventually be hers. Elena turned back to the table, her legs suddenly unsteady. The documents seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Birth certificates, death certificates, police reports, financial records, a paper trail of deception spanning decades. Why are you showing me this? She asked. Why now? Gabriel was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table's surface. Because I made a promise to your father. We were friends despite the family drama. He gave me copies of everything he'd found, made me swear that if anything happened to him, I'd make sure you knew the truth when you were old enough. But you waited 15 years. I tried to tell you before, when you turned 18, when you graduated college, but you were always surrounded by Victoria's people, always watched. And then you left town so suddenly. He shrugged. I thought maybe you'd figured it out on your own. Elena sank back into her chair, overwhelmed. So what am I supposed to do with this? My grandmother is elderly. Even if this is all true, what's the point of dragging it all up now? Gabriel reached across the table and touched her hand. His skin was warm, calloused from work, real in a way that made the surreal revelations feel manageable. The point is that you have choices now, real choices. You don't have to live in poverty. You don't have to struggle to raise your child alone. The trust fund is yours, it always was. Victoria has been managing it, but she can't touch the principal. Elena looked down at their joined hands, at the papers scattered between them, at the evidence of a family legacy built on lies and sealed with blood. Outside, Christmas Eve deepened into night, and somewhere in the darkness, her past and future collided. The weight of Gabriel's revelation hung between them like fog, thick and impenetrable. Clara's hands trembled as she set down her empty mug. the ceramic clicking against the wooden table with finality. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if sensing her distress. "You're lying," she whispered, though even as the words left her lips, she knew they weren't true. The resemblance she'd noticed earlier now made perfect sense. The same dark eyes, the same stubborn jawline that she remembered from old photographs tucked away in her mother's jewelry box. Gabriel reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a worn leather wallet. From it, he pulled a small, faded photograph and placed it on the table between them. Clara's breath caught in her throat. It was her mother, young and radiant, standing next to a man who looked remarkably like Gabriel. They were both smiling, their arms around each other in easy familiarity. "That's my father, Thomas, and your mother, Elizabeth," Gabriel said softly. "They were close once, very close." Clara picked up the photograph with shaking fingers, studying her mother's face. She'd never seen Elizabeth look so carefree, so genuinely happy. It was a stark contrast to the tired, worn woman who had raised Clara in their cramped apartment, working 2 jobs just to make ends meet. "I don't understand," Clara said, her voice barely audible. "My mother never mentioned having a brother. She said she had no family left, because my father made sure of that." Gabriel's expression darkened, years of buried anger flickering across his features. "When your mother married your father, a man the family deemed unsuitable, my grandfather cut her off completely, froze her trust fund, banned her from family gatherings, even threatened anyone who tried to maintain contact with her. The wind howled outside, rattling the windows as if nature itself was responding to the weight of these long-buried secrets." Clara pressed her hand to her swollen belly, feeling suddenly dizzy. "My father tried to help her secretly," Gabriel continued. "He would send money, letters, anything he could manage without my grandfather finding out. But when the old man discovered what Thomas was doing—" He paused, running a hand through his hair. "Let's just say my father learned to keep his distance, or risk being disowned himself." "So she was alone because your family are cowards," Clara said, surprising herself with the venom in her voice. Gabriel's jaw tightened. "You're not wrong. We all failed her, failed you." Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window despite her exhaustion. The storm showed no signs of letting up, and she could barely make out the shapes of snow-covered cars in the parking lot. Everything felt surreal, as if she'd stepped into someone else's life. "Why now?" she asked without turning around. "Why are you here tonight, telling me all of this?" She heard Gabriel's chair scrape against the floor as he stood. "Because my father is dying," he said quietly. "Lung cancer. The doctors say he has maybe a month, possibly 2 if he's lucky." Clara closed her eyes, pressing her forehead against the cool glass. "I'm sorry," she said automatically, though she wasn't sure what she felt about the death of an uncle she'd never known existed. "He's been trying to find you for years," Gabriel continued. "Hired private investigators, searched social media, everything. When we finally tracked you down and learned about your situation," he gestured vaguely toward her pregnancy, "he couldn't wait any longer. He sent me to find you, to bring you home." "Home?" Clara laughed bitterly, turning to face him. "You think I have a home with people who threw my mother away like garbage, who let her struggle and suffer while they sat in their mansions counting their money? The family has money, Clara. Serious money. Your mother's trust fund has been sitting untouched for 25 years, growing interest. There's enough there to ensure you and your baby never want for anything." The offer hung in the air between them, tempting and terrifying in equal measure. Clara thought of her empty refrigerator, her unpaid bills, the eviction notice tucked under a stack of papers on her kitchen counter. The baby kicked again, more gently this time, as if reminding her that this wasn't just about her anymore. "What would I have to do?" she asked carefully. Gabriel's relief was visible. "Come with me. Meet my father before he dies. Let him make amends for the family's mistakes. And if I say no—" "Then you say no," Gabriel said simply. "The money is yours by right, regardless. But my father, he needs to see you, to know that something of his sister survived. that her daughter is safe. Clara sank back into her chair, overwhelmed by the magnitude of the decision before her. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the small apartment, everything had changed forever. The manila envelope felt heavier than it should have as Elena pulled out the thick stack of documents. Marcus sat across from her at the kitchen table, his coffee growing cold as he watched her face change with each page she turned. The papers were copies, birth certificates, marriage licenses, death certificates, and court documents that painted a picture she'd never imagined. "Your grandmother fought for you," Marcus said quietly. "These are the legal papers from her custody petition when you were 7. Elena's hands trembled as she read Catherine Whitmore's formal request for guardianship. The language was clinical, but the desperation bled through every whereas and heretofore. Her grandmother had documented David's drinking, the missed school days, the bruises Elena had tried to hide. She'd hired lawyers, filed motions, requested home inspections. "I never knew," Elena whispered. "She never said anything when she visited." "She couldn't. The court issued a restraining order." Marcus pointed to a stamped document near the bottom of the stack. "Your father convinced the judge that Catherine was trying to poison your mind against your only surviving parent. He claimed she was manipulating you, using her wealth to buy your affection." The words hit Elena like physical blows. She remembered those visits growing brighter whenever her grandmother appeared, how Catherine would slip her books and small gifts, how she'd hold Elena's hands and study her face as if memorizing it. And then, suddenly, the visits had stopped. "He told me she didn't want to see me anymore," Elena said, her voice breaking. "He said rich people get bored with charity cases." Marcus reached across the table and gently turned to another page, a handwritten letter on Catherine Whitmore's personal stationery. The elegant script was shaky, aged, but every word was legible. "My dearest Elena, if you are reading this, it means you have finally come home to us, even if I'm no longer here to welcome you myself. I want you to know that not a single day passed that I didn't think of you, didn't wonder if you were safe and happy. The lawyers told me I had to stay away, that fighting for you in court would only make things harder for you with your father. I pray I made the right choice in stepping back, though my heart broke a little more each day. I know David filled your head with lies about us, about why we abandoned you. The truth is, we never stopped loving you. We never stopped being your family. I've watched from a distance as much as I could. Your high school graduation, your college acceptance, your struggles. I wanted to help so many times, but the legal agreements tied my hands." Elena couldn't read through her tears. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to her emotional turmoil. Marcus wordlessly handed her his handkerchief, a surprisingly old-fashioned gesture that reminded her painfully of her grandmother's genteel manners. "There's more," he said gently, "about the trust fund." With shaking hands, Elena found the trust documents. Catherine had established it when Elena was born, with provisions that would have paid for her education, her medical care, her future. But David had refused every payment, every attempt to help. He'd returned the checks uncashed, sent back the gifts unopened. "Your college tuition," Marcus explained. "Your grandmother tried to pay it directly to the university. Your father threatened to have her arrested for harassment. She had to watch you struggle with student loans when there was money sitting in an account with your name on it." Elena felt sick. All those nights she'd worked double shifts at the diner, all those times she'd chosen between textbooks and groceries, all those months she'd lived on ramen and hope, there had been money waiting for her. Her family hadn't abandoned her. Her father had stolen them from her. "Why didn't she try again after he died?" Elena asked. "I've been alone for 3 years. Marcus hesitated, then pulled out a final document, a private investigator's report dated 2 years earlier. Elena saw her own face in a surveillance photo, walking out of her apartment building with Stephen. She looked happy, in love, completely unaware she was being watched. "She did try to find you," Marcus said, "but by then you'd moved so many times after college. When she finally located you, you seemed settled, happy. She didn't want to disrupt your life with ancient family drama, especially when you appeared to have built something good for yourself. Elena laughed bitterly. Something good. Stephen was cheating on me with his co-worker. We were living paycheck to paycheck, while I believed we were saving for our future together. Your grandmother couldn't have known that from a photograph, Marcus said gently. She was trying to respect your autonomy, your right to choose your own life without interference from the family that had failed to protect you before. Elena stared at the papers spread across her small kitchen table. A life she'd never known existed, a love she'd never been allowed to receive. Her grandmother had died 6 months ago, taking with her years of unspoken words and ungiven embraces. The wind rattled her apartment windows, and Elena realized the snow had started again outside. Christmas Eve was slipping away, but something else was beginning. The manila envelope sat on the kitchen table like an accusation, its edges worn from being passed through too many hands. Elena stared at it while David finished washing their few dishes, the sound of running water a comforting backdrop to the storm brewing in her chest. "You don't have to open it tonight," he said softly, drying his hands on the threadbare towel. "Christmas morning, next week, never, it's your choice." But Elena knew that wasn't true. The envelope had been waiting for her for 23 years, and now that it was here, she couldn't ignore it any longer. Her fingers traced the edge where someone had written her name in careful script, Elena Catherine Morrison. Not Elena Martinez, the name she'd carried since her mother remarried when she was 7. Not the name that had followed her through foster care, through high school, through the lonely years of building a life from nothing. Her birth name, the one that connected her to people who had enough money to send lawyers bearing gifts on Christmas Eve. "Will you stay?" she asked, looking up at David. "While I read it?" He pulled out the chair beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Of course." The envelope opened with a whisper. Inside, Elena found not the legal document she'd expected, but a letter written on cream-colored stationery, the kind that probably cost more than she spent on groceries in a week. The handwriting was shaky but elegant, clearly belonging to someone elderly. "My dearest granddaughter." Elena's breath caught. Granddaughter. "If you are reading this, then David has found you, and I am likely gone from this world. I pray you can forgive an old woman's cowardice in not reaching out to you sooner. There is so much I need to explain, so much I should have done differently." Elena's hands trembled as she continued reading. "Your mother, Catherine, was my only daughter. When she became pregnant with you at 17, your grandfather, my husband Harold, was furious. He came from a generation that valued reputation above all else, and he saw Catherine's pregnancy as a scandal that would ruin the family name. I was weak then, Elena. I chose my marriage over my daughter, and that choice has haunted me every day since." The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of the life growing inside her. Elena pressed her free hand to her stomach, imagining her own mother at 17, scared and alone, carrying a child whose father would never be part of the picture. Harold forced Catherine to leave. He cut off all financial support, removed her from his will, and forbade anyone in the family from contacting her. I told myself it was temporary, that once you were born and the initial shock wore off, we could repair the damage. But Harold died when you were 2, and by then, Catherine had disappeared completely. I hired investigators, but she had changed her name, moved across the country. She wanted nothing to do with us. Elena remembered fragments of her early childhood. Her mother's constant anxiety about money, the way she would jump when the phone rang, how she never talked about family or the past. It had taken years for Elena to stop asking about grandparents and cousins, accepting that they simply didn't exist. I finally found you when you were 15, living in your 3rd foster home after Catherine's death. I wanted to bring you to live with me, to give you everything you deserved, but my own guilt paralyzed me. How could I explain that I had chosen silence over love? How could I ask for forgiveness when I couldn't forgive myself? David's hand found hers, squeezing gently. Elena realized she was crying, tears falling onto the expensive paper. "I am a coward, Elena, but I am not completely without honor. Everything I have, the houses, the investments, the trust funds, it all belongs to you now. You are the last Morrison, and it is your birthright. But more than that, it is my attempt to repair a fraction of the damage I caused by abandoning your mother when she needed me most. The letter continued with practical details. Bank account numbers, the name of the family attorney, properties Elena now owned in 3 different states. The numbers were staggering, enough money to ensure her child would never know hunger or uncertainty. But it was the final paragraph that broke her heart completely. I know I have no right to ask for your forgiveness. I know that money cannot replace the family you should have had, the grandmother who should have been there for every birthday, every scraped knee, every triumph and heartbreak. But please know that not a day passed when I didn't think of you, didn't wonder if you were safe and happy and loved. In my prayers, you were always surrounded by people who cherished you the way I should have. I hope that was true. I hope you found the family in others that blood failed to provide. All my love and deepest regret, your grandmother, Margaret Eleanor Morrison. Elena set the letter down with shaking hands, overwhelmed by a grief she hadn't expected, mourning not just a grandmother she'd never known, but the relationship they might have had, the support that could have changed everything. The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows as Maya carefully folded the last of her belongings into the worn suitcase. Each item carried weight beyond its physical presence. The threadbare sweater her mother had knitted, the single photograph of her parents, the ultrasound image that had become her talisman of hope. Tomorrow she would leave this cramped apartment behind, but the uncertainty of what lay ahead pressed against her chest like a stone. Daniel stood in the doorway, watching her movements with an expression she couldn't quite read. Since their conversation about the trust fund 3 days ago, something had shifted between them. The careful formality he'd maintained since Christmas Eve had cracked, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the polished exterior. "The car will arrive at 10, he said quietly. "The estate is approximately 2 hours north. Mrs. Patterson has prepared a room overlooking the gardens. She thought you might find it peaceful." Maya paused in her packing, her hand resting on her rounded belly where the baby had been unusually active this morning. "Tell me about her. Mrs. Patterson. She's been with the family for 37 years. Started as a maid when she was barely 18. Daniel's voice softened with genuine affection. "She practically raised your cousins after their parents died. Victoria and Eleanor, they're closer in age to you than your father was." The mention of cousins sent a strange thrill through Maya. Family, real family, beyond the distant memory of her parents. "Do they know about me?" "They know your father existed." Margaret made sure of that much. Daniel stepped into the room, his usual careful distance dissolving. "But they don't know about you specifically. Margaret kept that information contained to very few people. People like you." "Yes." His admission carried the weight of years. "I've known about you for almost a decade, Maya, since I first started working for the family's legal firm." The revelation struck her like a physical blow. "A decade? You've known I existed for 10 years and never—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the betrayal that flooded through her. "It wasn't my place," Daniel said quickly, moving closer. Margaret's instructions were explicit. "No contact unless you reached out first, or unless circumstances became—" He gestured helplessly at her surroundings, the obvious signs of her struggle. "Desperate enough that your conscience finally overruled your instructions." The bitterness in her voice surprised even her. "Something like that." Daniel's composure cracked entirely. "Do you think this has been easy? Knowing you were out there, knowing you might need help, and being bound by legal obligations and a dead woman's wishes?" Maya sank onto the edge of her mattress, overwhelmed. "I don't understand any of this. The money, the secrecy, why my grandmother cared enough to leave me a fortune, but not enough to acknowledge me while she was alive." Daniel sat beside her, careful to maintain space between them, but close enough that she could see the conflict etched in his features. "Your grandmother was many things, but simple wasn't one of them. She loved your father deeply, and his death devastated her. But she also blamed him for choosing love over duty, for walking away from everything she'd built. So she punished me for his choices, or protected you from them. Daniel's hand moved as if to comfort her, then stopped short. The Thornfield fortune comes with obligations, expectations, social pressures that destroyed your father's happiness. Margaret might have believed she was giving you something better, freedom to choose your own path. Poverty isn't freedom, Daniel. No, it isn't. His voice was barely above a whisper. And watching you struggle these past few days, seeing what you've endured alone. He turned to face her fully. Maya, I need you to know that coming here, helping you, it's not just about following Margaret's instructions anymore. The air between them crackled with unspoken tension. Maya studied his face, seeing past the professional mask to something raw and vulnerable underneath. What are you saying? I'm saying that somewhere between Christmas Eve and this moment, my reasons for being here changed completely. Daniel's hand finally bridged the space between them, covering hers with gentle warmth. I'm saying I care about what happens to you, about your future, about... A sharp pain lanced through Maya's abdomen, cutting off his words. She gasped, her free hand flying to her belly as the baby seemed to somersault inside her. The movement was stronger than anything she'd felt before, almost violent in its intensity. Maya? Daniel's voice sharpened with concern. What's wrong? I don't know. The pain came again, wrapping around her back and squeezing like a vice. Something's not right. The baby... Another wave hit her, and this time she couldn't suppress a cry. Daniel was on his feet instantly, his phone already in his hand. We're going to the hospital, now. As another contraction seized her, Maya felt her carefully planned future crumbling once again. The trust fund, the estate, the growing connection with Daniel. None of it mattered if she lost the baby. Nothing mattered except the life she carried, the tiny heart beating alongside her own. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight as Elena stared at the documents spread across her kitchen table. Her tea had grown cold hours ago, but she couldn't bring herself to move. The legal papers seemed to shimmer in the lamplight, their significance weighing heavier than the baby pressing against her ribs. Marcus had left an hour earlier, giving her space to process everything. The silence felt different now, not the hollow emptiness of abandonment, but the pregnant pause before a life-altering decision. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in pristine white that would be gone by morning. She traced her finger along the trust document's elegant letterhead. Blackwood Holdings, the family name she'd been denied for so long, now offered back to her with strings attached that felt more like lifelines than chains. $25 million. The number still seemed surreal, impossible. The baby kicked, a sharp reminder of the ticking clock that had nothing to do with inheritance deadlines. Elena pressed her palm against her belly, feeling the restless movements of her child who would be born into whatever decision she made tonight. Her phone buzzed. A text from her landlord. Eviction notice will be posted tomorrow unless payment received. Elena closed her eyes, remembering David's empty promises, his confident smile as he'd walked away from their life together. He'd made his choice. Now she had to make hers. She picked up the second document Marcus had left, a letter written in her mother's familiar handwriting, dated just weeks before the accident. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded the aged paper. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then the worst has happened, and I'm no longer there to protect you from the truth. I pray Marcus has found you, that he's kept his promise to watch over you from afar. I know you must hate them, hate us, for the years of silence. But understand that every choice I made was to keep you safe from a family that sees love as weakness and loyalty as currency. Your grandfather would have used you, molded you into something cold and calculating like the rest of them. I couldn't bear to watch that happen. But circumstances change, and if Marcus is showing you this letter, it means you need what they can offer. The trust isn't their money, Elena. It's yours. Your father set it aside before he died, money he'd earned separately from the family business. He made me promise it would go to his children if anything happened to him. Take it, not for them, but for yourself and your baby. Use it to build the life your father dreamed of giving you. All my love, Mom. P.S. Marcus was your father's best friend, not just an employee. Trust him. He loved your father like a brother, and he's been protecting you the same way all these years. Elena's vision blurred as tears splashed onto the letter. All these years she'd painted Marcus as just another suit doing the family's bidding, never imagining he might be grieving too, never considering that her mother's choices had been about protection, not abandonment. The baby's movements settled into a gentle rhythm, as if responding to her calmer heartbeat. Elena wiped her eyes and looked around her tiny apartment, at the peeling wallpaper, the space heater humming in the corner, the crib she'd assembled from second-hand parts. She thought of all the nights she'd lain awake wondering how she'd manage, all the dreams she'd shelved, because survival took precedence over hope. Her phone rang, startling her. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. "I'm sorry to call so late." His voice was gentle when she answered. "I just wanted you to know. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. But Elena, I need you to understand something. This isn't about the family wanting you back. Most of them don't even know about the trust. This is about honoring what your parents wanted for you." "I read her letter," Elena whispered. A long pause. "Your mother was remarkable. Your father used to say she had a moral compass that could guide ships through storms. She was right to protect you, but maybe it's time to stop hiding." After he hung up, Elena walked to her bedroom window and looked out at the snow-covered street. Somewhere in the distance, church bells were ringing Christmas morning into existence. In a few hours, families would gather around trees and share gifts chosen with love. Her child deserved that kind of Christmas, that kind of life. She returned to the kitchen table and picked up the pen Marcus had left beside the documents. Her signature would change everything, not just the zeros in her bank account, but her entire identity. She would no longer be Elena Hayes, the abandoned girl making it on her own. She would become Elena Blackwood, heir to a legacy she'd never wanted, but perhaps needed to embrace. The pen felt heavy in her hand as she signed her name with careful, deliberate strokes. The grandfather clock in the corner chimed midnight as Elena sat across from Thomas in the dimly lit living room, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had long since grown cold. The Christmas tree lights cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an almost ethereal atmosphere that seemed fitting for the revelations that hung between them like delicate ornaments threatening to shatter. "Your grandmother never stopped looking for you," Thomas said quietly, his weathered fingers tracing the rim of his own untouched cup. "Even after the lawyers said there was no way to find you, even after your mother had covered her tracks so thoroughly that it seemed impossible." Elena felt the baby shift restlessly inside her, as if responding to the tension in her body. "But she did find me, didn't she? Otherwise, you wouldn't be here." Thomas nodded slowly. 3 months ago, a private investigator finally traced you through old-school records, employment databases. Margaret was so excited when the call came. His voice caught slightly. She wanted to come herself, wanted to see you to explain everything in person. But she didn't. Elena's voice was sharper than she intended, the old hurt bleeding through despite her attempts to remain composed. She couldn't. Thomas met her eyes, and she saw genuine pain reflected there. The cancer had already spread too far by then. She was in and out of consciousness, fighting just to stay alive long enough to make things right. The word cancer hit Elena like a physical blow. Whatever anger she'd been holding on to seemed to deflate slightly, replaced by an unexpected grief for a woman she'd never really known. When? 2 weeks ago. Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a sealed envelope, thick and cream-colored. Her name written across the front in shaky handwriting. She wrote this herself, during one of her lucid moments, made me promise to deliver it personally, along with something else. Elena stared at the envelope as if it might bite her. What else? Thomas smiled sadly. The truth about why you were really taken away, and the means to ensure you and your child never have to struggle the way you have been. Outside, snow had begun to fall more heavily, coating the windows with frost that blurred the streetlights into soft, golden halos. Elena found herself thinking about all the Christmas Eves she'd spent alone, all the time she'd wondered about the family that had let her go so easily. Now here was Thomas, this gentle man who claimed to represent everything she'd lost, offering her answers she wasn't sure she was brave enough to hear. Margaret always blamed herself, Thomas continued, his voice barely above a whisper. She spent years believing she'd failed you, that she should have fought harder when your mother demanded the separation. My mother demanded it? Elena's head snapped up. This didn't align with the story she'd always been told, the narrative of rejection and abandonment that had shaped her understanding of her own worth. Your mother was troubled, Elena, beautiful, charming, but deeply unstable. When she married into the Whitmore family, she seemed like she might find some peace, some stability, but wealth and security weren't enough to heal whatever was broken inside her. Thomas paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. She became convinced that your grandmother was trying to turn you against her, that the family was planning to take you away. The paranoia grew worse after your father died. She would disappear for days with you, then return making wild accusations, threatening legal action. Elena felt the room spinning slightly. But the money, the inheritance they said I wasn't entitled to, never existed as a barrier. Your trust fund has been waiting for you since you turned 18. Margaret added to it every year, hoping that someday she'd be able to explain, to bring you home. Thomas leaned forward, his expression earnest. You're not just entitled to a portion of the family fortune, Elena. As the only surviving heir of your father's line, you're entitled to a significant share of everything. The baby kicked hard against Elena's ribs, as if emphasizing the magnitude of what she was hearing. Her mind raced through the implications. No more struggling to pay rent, no more choosing between groceries and utilities, no more fear about how she'd provide for her child. But underneath the relief was a deeper, more complex emotion. Grief for all the lost years, for a grandmother who died hoping for reconciliation, for a mother whose mental illness had robbed them all of the family they might have been. She wants to meet you, Thomas said suddenly. Elena looked up, confused. But you said she died. Not Margaret. Your cousin Sarah. She's been helping with the search, managing your grandmother's affairs. She's actually in town, has been since yesterday, hoping. He gestured toward the window. She's staying at the Marriott downtown. She didn't want to overwhelm you, but she's been waiting to hear if you'd be willing to see her. The weight of possibility settled over Elena like a warm blanket, both comforting and terrifying in its implications. The rain had stopped by the time Elena reached the Ashford estate, but her hands still trembled as she stood before the imposing iron gates. Through the intricate metalwork, she could see the sprawling mansion beyond, 3 stories of Georgian elegance that spoke of old money and older secrets. Christmas lights twinkled along the roofline, their cheerful glow at odds with the dread pooling in her stomach. Marcus emerged from the driver's seat, his face grim. You don't have to do this tonight, Elena. We could wait until after Christmas. She shook her head, one hand instinctively moving to her rounded belly. No, I need to know the truth, all of it. The baby kicked as if in agreement, and she drew strength from that small movement. The gate swung open at Marcus's touch of a security panel, and they walked up the curved driveway in silence. The front door opened before they could knock, revealing a woman Elena didn't recognize, tall, silver-haired, wearing an expression of barely contained emotion. Elena. The woman's voice broke on her name. Oh my God, you look just like Catherine did at your age. Aunt Margaret? Elena's voice came out smaller than she'd intended. This wasn't the cold, disapproving woman she'd imagined based on years of silence and rejection. Margaret stepped aside to let them in, her eyes never leaving Elena's face. Come in, please. The others are waiting in the library. The foyer was exactly as Elena had imagined: marble floors, crystal chandelier, oil portraits of stern-faced ancestors watching from gilded frames. But there was something else too: fresh pine garlands, the scent of cinnamon and cloves, and wrapped presents beneath a towering Christmas tree that somehow made the space feel less intimidating. They followed Margaret down a hallway lined with family photographs. Elena caught glimpses of her mother as a child, a teenager, a young woman, images that documented a life she'd never heard stories about. In one photo, Catherine stood between two other girls near this very Christmas tree, all three laughing at something beyond the camera's view. "That was the Christmas before everything changed," Margaret said quietly, noticing Elena's pause. She was 18, so full of life and dreams. The library doors opened to reveal three people seated near a crackling fireplace. Elena recognized her Uncle Charles immediately. He had the same dark eyes as her mother, though his were shadowed with what looked like years of regret. Beside him sat a woman who must be his wife, Patricia, and in the corner armchair, an elderly man who could only be Elena's grandfather. The silence stretched uncomfortably until Charles stood, his movements stiff and uncertain. "Elena, thank you for coming. I know this must be difficult." "Difficult?" The word came out sharper than Elena intended. "I've spent 27 years believing my family wanted nothing to do with me. Difficult doesn't begin to cover it." Her grandfather spoke for the first time, his voice gravelly with age and emotion. "Sit down, child, please. There are things you need to understand about that night, about the choices we made." Elena remained standing, Marcus's presence beside her a steadying force. "I know about the accident, about how my parents died. What I don't understand is why you turned your backs on me afterward." Margaret moved to pour tea from a service set on a side table, her hands shaking slightly. "We thought we were protecting you." "From what?" Charles ran a hand through his greying hair. "From this." He gestured around the opulent room. "From the guilt, the judgment, the impossible expectations. Catherine ran away because she couldn't breathe in this world anymore. We convinced ourselves that you'd be better off without all of this baggage." "So you just left me in foster care?" Elena's voice rose despite her efforts to stay calm. "You let me grow up, thinking I was unwanted, unloved. We checked on you," Patricia said quietly. "We made sure you were placed with good families, that you had what you needed." "What I needed was family." Elena's composure finally cracked. "I needed to know where I came from, to have someone tell me stories about my mother, to not spend every Christmas wondering why I wasn't worth keeping." Her grandfather struggled to his feet, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "You were worth everything, Elena. That was the problem. We'd already failed Catherine so completely that we couldn't bear the thought of failing you too." The baby chose that moment to deliver a particularly strong kick, and Elena gasped, her hand flying to her side. The sound galvanized the room. Suddenly everyone was moving, offering chairs and water and concern. "I'm fine," Elena said, settling into the offered chair. "It's just, this is a lot to process." Marcus knelt beside her chair, his eyes searching her face. "We can go any time you want." But Elena found herself studying the faces around her, seeing her mother's eyes in Charles, her own stubborn chin in Margaret, the familiar way her grandfather's hands moved when he was agitated. These were her people, flawed and complicated and human. "No," she said slowly. "I want to hear the rest." The leather journal felt warm in Maya's hands as she sat across from Thomas in the small cafe near the courthouse. Steam rose from their untouched coffee cups while she traced the embossed initials on the cover, E.C., her grandmother's mark. "She wrote about you," Thomas said quietly, watching Maya's face. "Every day after your parents died, every day after Charles made his choice, she never stopped believing you'd come back." Maya's throat tightened. "But she didn't fight for me." "She tried." Thomas pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents. "These are copies of the legal briefs, the custody petitions, the appeals. Your uncle had connections, money, influence. Eleanor was grieving, overwhelmed, but she fought until her lawyers told her continuing would bankrupt the estate and still likely fail. The papers scattered across the small table like fallen leaves. Maya glimpsed official seals, court stamps, her own name repeated in cold legal type. A child reduced to case numbers and filing dates. Charles convinced the court that Eleanor was too elderly, too unstable after losing her son. He painted himself as the responsible choice, younger, financially secure, married. Thomas's voice carried decades of suppressed anger. What he didn't tell them was that he'd already decided you were a liability he couldn't afford to keep. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly. Because of what I might inherit. The will was complex. Your father stood to inherit everything, but if something happened to him, it would pass to his children. Charles knew that if he officially adopted you, it would strengthen your claim, so he took custody but never made it legal, never gave you his name, never treated me like family. The words came out flat, emotionless. Maya had learned long ago not to waste energy on pain that couldn't be fixed. Thomas nodded grimly. He was gambling that Eleanor would change her will, disinherit your father's line entirely, but she never did. She kept hoping you'd come home. Maya opened the journal with trembling fingers. Her grandmother's handwriting filled the pages, elegant script that spoke of garden parties and charity committees, but also of sleepless nights and endless worry. December 15th, 1995, Maya would be 7 today. I wonder if she likes chocolate cake. I wonder if anyone remembered. March 22nd, 1998, saw a girl at the market today with Maya's eyes, followed her for 3 blocks before realizing my foolishness. Thomas says I need to let go, but how do you let go of your heart? Christmas Eve, 2003, 15 years old now. Does she know about her parents? Does she know she's loved? Charles won't return my calls. The lawyers say my hands are tied unless she reaches out first. My precious girl, lost in a system I helped create. The entries blurred as tears filled Maya's eyes, page after page of love and regret, of a grandmother who never stopped caring but didn't know how to bridge the gap her own family's dysfunction had created. She left everything in trust, Thomas continued. The house, the investments, the charitable foundation, all of it waiting for you to claim it, with strict instructions that Charles could never touch a penny. How much? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Enough to ensure your child never wants for anything. Enough to fund the education center you've dreamed about. Enough to let you choose your own path without looking over your shoulder. Maya thought of her cramped apartment, the collection notices stuffed in her mailbox, the fear that kept her awake at night. But she also thought of the years of abandonment, the foster homes, the constant message that she wasn't worth fighting for. There's something else, Thomas said, producing a small velvet box. She wanted you to have this when you came home. Inside was a simple gold locket, worn smooth by generations of hands. Maya opened it to find 2 photographs, her parents on their wedding day, young and radiant, and a baby picture she'd never seen of herself, laughing in her father's arms. She wore it every day after you left, Thomas said. Said it kept her close to both the daughter she lost and the granddaughter she was waiting to find. Maya's composure finally cracked. The tears came in waves, for the grandmother she'd never really known, for the family that could have been, for all the Christmas mornings spent feeling utterly alone in the world. Thomas reached across the table and covered her hand with his. She never gave up hope, Maya. Even at the end, she believed love would find a way to bring you home. Outside the cafe window, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, dusting the courthouse steps where Maya would soon face the uncle who had shaped so much of her pain. But for the first time in her adult life, she felt something she'd forgotten how to recognize, the knowledge that she belonged somewhere, that someone had loved her enough to wait. The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows of the estate's sitting room, as Elena sat across from her grandmother, Margaret Blackwood, for the first time in 15 years. The old woman's hands trembled slightly as she poured tea from an ornate silver service, the delicate clink of china the only sound breaking the heavy silence. "You look just like your mother did at your age," Margaret said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The same stubborn set to your jaw, the same fire in your eyes." Elena's hand instinctively moved to her rounded belly. Don't talk about her like you cared." Margaret's cup rattled against its saucer as she set it down. "I did care, more than you'll ever know." She reached into a wooden box beside her chair and withdrew a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon. "These are every letter I wrote to you and your mother after you left, dozens of them, all returned unopened." The sight of the letters hit Elena like a physical blow. "That's impossible. Mother never—" "Your father intercepted them." Margaret's voice grew stronger, edged with old pain. "Thomas was a proud man, Elena. When I told your mother she had to choose between the family and him, he made sure she could never change her mind, even when she wanted to." Elena stared at the bundle, her world tilting. She wanted to come back. 3 years after you left, she tried. She was sick, needed help. But Thomas had poisoned her against us so thoroughly that she couldn't bring herself to actually make contact. She would drive to the gates, sit in that old car of yours and just wait. The groundskeeper told me later he'd seen her there dozens of times. The tears Elena had been holding back since yesterday finally spilled over. "You're lying. She hated you. She said you called her a gold digger, said she wasn't good enough for your precious family name." "I was terrified," Margaret admitted, her own eyes glistening. "Your grandfather had built this empire from nothing, and I'd watched it nearly crumble under my son's reckless spending and drinking. When your mother came along, young and beautiful and pregnant, I saw history repeating itself. I thought—" She paused, struggling with the words. "I thought I was protecting everyone. Instead, I destroyed the only good thing that had happened to this family in years." Elena looked around the opulent room, at the oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors, at the crystal chandeliers and marble fireplace. All of it felt hollow now, meaningless. "Why tell me this now? Why did you send David to find me?" "Because I'm dying." The words fell between them like stones. "The doctors give me weeks, maybe a month, and because David convinced me that some mistakes can still be fixed, even if it's almost too late." As if summoned by his name, David appeared in the doorway. Elena's heart lurched at the sight of him. In the clear morning light, she could see the exhaustion etched in his features, the weight of secrets he'd been carrying. "I should go," Elena said, starting to rise. "This was a mistake. Please." Margaret's voice cracked. "Let me tell you about the trust." Elena froze halfway out of her chair. "What trust?" "The one your grandfather established before you were born. He was so excited about having a grandchild, he set aside $5 million for your education, your future, your children's futures." Margaret's smile was bittersweet. "It's been growing for 26 years, waiting for you." "I don't want your money," Elena said. But her voice lacked conviction. She thought of her empty refrigerator, her overdue rent, the baby coming in just weeks. "It's not my money. It's yours. It always has been." Margaret reached for another document from her box. "But there's something else. The foundation, all of our charitable work, the children's hospitals, the scholarship programs. It needs someone who understands what it means to struggle, to fight for every opportunity. Someone with your mother's heart and your grandfather's determination." David stepped forward. "Elena, you don't have to decide anything right now, just hear her out." Elena looked between them. These two people who had turned her world upside down in less than 24 hours. "How do I know any of this is real? How do I know you won't just disappear again when it's convenient?" Margaret struggled to her feet, moving slowly to an ornate desk by the window. She returned with a photograph. Elena as a toddler, sitting on a man's shoulders, both of them laughing. "Your grandfather carried this until the day he died. He never stopped hoping you'd come home." Elena took the photograph with shaking hands, studying the face of the grandfather she barely remembered. In his eyes, She saw the same stubborn determination that had carried her through years of struggle, the same fierce protectiveness she already felt for her unborn child. Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside the warm sitting room, something else was beginning, fragile and uncertain but real, the possibility of family, the chance to rewrite a story that had been broken for far too long. The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows of the Blackwood mansion, casting long shadows across the mahogany floors where Sarah had spent her first night back in the family home. She woke to the sound of William moving quietly in the kitchen below, the gentle clatter of dishes and the whistle of a kettle, creating a domestic symphony that felt both foreign and comforting. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had been unusually active throughout the night, as if sensing the momentous changes surrounding them. Everything was different now. The suffocating loneliness of her apartment, replaced by these grand rooms filled with portraits of ancestors she was only beginning to understand. "Good morning," William called softly as she descended the curved staircase, her fingers trailing along the polished banister. He stood in the doorway of the breakfast room, still wearing yesterday's clothes but somehow managing to look effortlessly put together. "I hope you slept well." "Better than I have in months," she admitted, surprised by the truth of it. Despite everything, the revelations, the emotional upheaval, the sheer impossibility of her situation, she had slept deeply and dreamlessly. William had prepared a proper breakfast, fresh fruit, warm pastries from the local bakery that had somehow managed to open on Christmas morning, and tea served in delicate china cups that probably cost more than her monthly rent. The normalcy of it felt surreal after yesterday's earth-shattering discoveries. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sarah began, settling into a chair that had probably hosted generations of Blackwood family conversations. "About the foundation, about using the money to help people like me." William nodded, his expression careful and attentive. "It's a big decision. There's no need to rush into anything." "But there is, isn't there?" She met his eyes directly. "Every day I wait, there are other pregnant women going hungry, other families being torn apart by secrets and pride and stubbornness." Her voice grew stronger as she spoke. "My grandmother destroyed my mother's life because she couldn't accept that love doesn't follow the rules of social status. I won't let that kind of damage continue." The conviction in her own words surprised her. Somewhere between yesterday's heartbreak and this morning's clarity, she had found her purpose. William's smile was gentle but proud. "Your mother would be amazed to see the woman you become." "Tell me about her," Sarah said suddenly. "Not the tragic parts, I know those now. Tell me about who she was before everything went wrong." For the next hour, William painted a picture of Elizabeth Blackwood that Sarah had never imagined. Not the broken woman who had died too young, but a vibrant girl who had climbed trees in this very garden, who had once convinced the entire household staff to help her stage elaborate puppet shows, who had dreams of becoming a teacher because she believed education could change the world. "She would have loved to see you carrying on that spirit," William said, refilling her teacup with practiced ease. "The foundation was always her dream, you know. Even as a teenager, she talked about using the family wealth to level playing fields instead of maintaining barriers." Sarah felt tears threatening again, but these were different from yesterday's grief. These carried hope. Sound of a car in the driveway interrupted the moment. Through the window, Sarah saw a sleek black sedan pulling up to the front entrance. Her stomach tightened with sudden anxiety. "Are you expecting someone?" William's expression grew serious. "Your Uncle Richard. I may have taken some liberties in reaching out to him last night." Before Sarah could respond, the doorbell chimed with the same elaborate melody she remembered from her childhood. William squeezed her shoulder gently as he passed. "You don't have to see him if you're not ready." But Sarah was already standing, smoothing down her clothes and taking a deep breath. "No, it's time." The man who entered the breakfast room looked exactly like the photographs in the hallway, only older and more weathered. Richard Blackwood carried himself with the same aristocratic bearing that had once intimidated a 5-year-old girl. But now Sarah could see past it to something else, uncertainty, perhaps even regret. "Sarah." Her name sounded strange in his voice, formal and careful. You look exactly like your mother at that age, Uncle Richard. The title felt foreign on her tongue after so many years. They stood facing each other across the room, where their family had shared countless meals, where decisions had been made that shaped all their lives. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken apologies and lost time. Finally, Richard cleared his throat. "William tells me you're planning to establish a foundation. I'd like to hear about it." Sarah lifted her chin, drawing strength from her mother's memory and her own newfound purpose. "Then sit down. We have a lot to discuss."